Screen. All right. So before we pick up where we left off last time, I need opinions. Does that look good for the new Tesla? Those cool logos? That was my TV name when I used to be a competitive eater. And then it was my name of my software company. And now it's my consulting company. But the point is, you just proved the point. You said, what is awesomefat.com? So when people see this driving down the highway, at the very least, they're going to say, what the heck is that, right? And go search for the...
I mean, not gonna lie, I would probably displacing that 5 people.
Yeah. It is always funny because I used to have it on my vehicles. I called my car the Fatmobile. So I used to have it on my vehicles for years until I sold my company in 2014. But now I've built up my consulting company again. And but what's interesting is sometimes you'd have people follow you like to like a Target parking lot or something like that, and then you see me because they like kind of assumed it was like some kind of like weight loss pill or diet thing, and then I get out of the car like, okay, not that. probably not that. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, that is cool.
All right, so that's getting done Monday morning. All right, so let's get over to, oh, hold on, was there a, that was terrible. It needs a sharper font.
Yeah, I feel like the font doesn't like you got like this slick logo, right? But then you got like you need like a sharper font. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. But don't they kind of contrast each other? I kind of know what you mean though. But like the logo looks pretty, I think I know what you mean. But would that meld good or is the contrast good? Yeah, the snow today is terrible. I have a golf tee time tomorrow. It's supposed to get back up. It's supposed to be like 52 or something tomorrow and sunny. So I mean, I'm assuming all this is just gonna melt away. Well, yeah, but your pep band concert's indoors.
Are you sure?
Well, I don't know. I'm making the assumption that it would be indoors.
No. No, pep band. Yeah.
Oh, really?
We perform outside.
Oh, well, so shows what I know. All right, so last time we were talking about the Singleton design pattern. We didn't quite see the Singleton design pattern yet. At this point, we saw extras, Android's built-in way of sending information from screen 1 to screen 2, well, between multiple screens. So let's review that here quickly. All right. So what we had done in our app up to this point is we now have 2 screens. We have our main activity, and then we also created a screen 2. Now inside of main activity, we have a button that says go to screen 2. And when you click that button, it's going to take you to screen 2. And the mechanism by which it does that, the person in our app that knows how to launch another activity is the current activity. So inside main activity here, when we have our button clicked, what we first do is we create an intent. We intend to launch from this activity, this secondary activity. All right. We haven't actually done the launching yet. We've just created this intent. We intend to launch. Then we take advantage of our intent. So think of our intent like a suitcase. All right. And we can stuff stuff into that suitcase for transport to the next screen. So we're going to put an extra in there, and I put a variable named name and an associated value Mike with that. And then I told the current activity to start a new activity following the desires of this intent. Okay. And this is how that new screen was launched, was born. Okay, because an activity is like this special kind of thing that Android, the Android operating system, knows how to run and take over the screen of your application. If I go into screen 2, OnCreate in screen 2. So this is the thing that this is, we have something called the Android activity lifecycle. I can just show that to you real quick. Android activity lifecycle. This probably will have a picture on it. That gets us this guy. Activity lifecycle. All right, so when an activity is first launched, here's the set of functions that get called. The very first one is called OnCreate, followed by OnStart, followed by OnResume. Now the activity is running on our screen. So there's actually 3 different points of stopping, if you will. You can almost think of this life cycle as the time periods where we can interject logic into our application. All right. So OnCreate, OnStart, OnResume, these all happen before something is on the screen. Okay. Actually, OnResume might mean it's already on the screen. So if you want something to definitely happen before there's any sort of visual component to your application, you would do it inside of OnCreate. All right. But there are 3 different levels here, where 3 different points in time where you can interject before the app fully is launched. Now, when you put an app in the background, when you switch, you push the home button, you switch to a different application, something like that, so when another activity comes into the foreground, the current activity pauses. So you can do some bookkeeping stuff on pause. So you can tell your app maybe to stop animations. You can tell it to, maybe you were currently downloading something or streaming something in the background. Maybe you pause that so it's not using up network stuff. Maybe you have GPS stuff going on where that's using up battery to constantly hit the GPS and you're not having to update locations on the screen. So these are things you might do inside of OnPause. The app is no longer what the user is currently using on the application, so I'm going to turn off battery draining stuff, for example. On stop, so the activity actually is finished. On destroyed, it's actually gone. So these might be bookkeeping cleanup stuff as well. Maybe you just pause the GPS stuff here and you actually disconnect it down here so that there's not extra stuff running. But the point of this little chart here is that there are various points in time where we can insert programming logic inside our Android activity to make things happen at certain times that might seem appropriate. What we've messed with at this point, which is our entry point, we can almost think of it as like our main method for our Android application, is this OnCreate thing. Okay, when an activity is first born, the very first function that gets called automatically is OnCreate. And we see that right here. That is already included for us in our code. So we can put stuff inside here. So what's actually happening inside of OnCreate? Well, we're setting what our content view for the screen looks like. So we're saying, oh, it's actually going to be our activity screen 2, which is this dude right here. That's what we want this screen. This activity is going to present this layout to the screen. All right, but then what did we do in here? We went ahead and gave ourselves programmatic access to a text view. We went ahead and grabbed the intent associated with this activity. This was the intent that was used to get us here. All right, so we're kind of like taking our suitcase off the bus. Then we're going to use that activity to extract the value associated with a variable named name, which if you remember back on this screen, I packaged up name with the value Mike. So I went ahead and used my intent to get an extra from that guy. Which extra? The one named name, and I stored the value inside of this variable, and then I just set my text view equal to that. All right, so we saw an example there of launching another screen and sending information from one screen to another screen. All right, so let's go ahead and run this real quick. And then we're going to show kind of when this starts becoming inconvenient. All right, so here's my original screen. I'll say go to screen 2. Here's this screen. That value Mike has shown up here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a button on this screen that says go to screen 3. Okay, so we're going to launch yet another screen. So I'll come in here. Well, actually, let's put our button in there first. I'll go ahead and write the handler for that. So we'll say public void OnNextScreen button pressed. This guy will take a view as a parameter, and we're going to put some stuff in that function. We won't write the logic yet. We'll just set it up and let's go connect it up. Okay, so this is on my second screen. So I'm going to go to my interface for my second screen here, and I'll go ahead and dump a button in here. And we're going to have this guy say, go to screen 3. And we're going to have his on click call the on next screen button press that we just wrote. All right. Now, ultimately, what we're doing here is we're going from screen 1 to screen 2 to screen 3, and we want to get that same value, Mike, passed along to all 3 of these screens. Maybe it's your logged in username or something like that, something that would appear on multiple screens inside the application. All right, so we're showing kind of the built-in way of doing this. We'll still do this with extras. So now let me go ahead and let's create a new activity. And this guy is going to be a, didn't somebody help me find, there's empty activity. And we'll call this guy screen 3. Again, it's not a launcher activity, so it's not the original activity that launches when we launch our application. It's something that will be generated during the running of our application. So I'll go ahead and hit finish. All right, so here's our activity 3, and it gave us a screen 3 view here. So I'll come in here, I'll do our usual. We'll update our view, convert view to linear layout. And I just want to test something here real quick. I'm pretty sure it gives you a horizontal linear layout by default, which I don't understand why, but I'm interested in just seeing if that's the case. Yeah, it gives you a horizontal one. And it says horizontal here, but, and I know what you mean, but over here when I go to orientation, it's not set. See how there's nothing for orientation. That's why I was interested in, because I've seen this. So I'm just going to flip this to vertical for no good reason other than I like my base to be a vertical linear layout.
I get it. So when you're pulling from the layout, it shows that there's no empty display, but it starts off.
Yeah. My feeling is that probably the default state of a linear layout is horizontal. And there's a bug in the program here where they're not populating the drop down here with the word horizontal, even though that was the default. Just a stupid thing. And again, just to keep bringing attention to it, if you're going to do professional Android applications, you're probably going to use the constraint layout thing that's in there. I just am terrible at interfaces, and this is what I can pull off. So I always like to start with a vertical linear layout base. So all of my user interfaces are always nice and blocky. So I guess deal. So I'll go ahead and put this text view back in here. And we'll name this guy. We'll call this guy name TV. I'm going to increase the font so I can read it. There we go. There's my main TV. Now we're going to go ahead and let's launch this third screen first. So we'll go to screen 2, Java. We're going to create our intent. Intent I is equal to new intent from the current context. And we're going to screen3.class. And then we'll go ahead and say this dot start activity I. So we're not using extras or anything yet. All we're doing is saying, I want to go to this other screen. All right, and we'll go ahead and run our application. So it's going to take us back to our main screen. We say go to screen 2, it passed Mike along. Go to screen 3, and it just shows us our third screen that just has our text view in it. We haven't passed any information along. All right, we can get back to screen 2 by hitting the built-in back button here on Android, which is different than iPhone. iPhone doesn't have a built-in back button. So when I do this, it does kill off this activity, which would trigger OnPause, OnStop, and then OnDestroy. These 3 things, part of that life cycle, would get triggered when I hit that back button. Because this activity, this screen is getting killed off. As opposed to if I hit the home button, it would actually just call OnPause. Because it's still living, it's just in the background. Okay, so you kind of get the purpose of this activity lifecycle thing. You get some different points in time you can interject in the application in case that made sense for your particular application. Our dice roller, there's not a whole lot of stuff going on in the background, so not a real reason to do some of this stuff, but you can imagine some more complex applications might have a rationale for doing some of this stuff. All right, so when I hit back here, it takes me back to this screen. If I go back to screen 3, at this point, it's a new version of screen 3. It didn't just bring up the old one. It's a brand new activity. All right. Okay. And we can actually prove that to ourselves if we want. We can create a counter and then show that counter on the next screen, right? And then increment the counter every time we hit the button and pass the updated value to it. So if you want to see that, I can come back to this guy and we'll go to just our main activity. And let me just create a global variable here, private counter, or private int counter. We'll initialize this guy to 0. We'll say I.PutExtra. We'll name this guy counter, and we'll pass along counter. And then we'll say counter plus plus. So we'll increment that variable every single time we do that. And then over here on screen 2, we'll go ahead and get our counter out of this. Int counter is equal to my intent dot get int extra counter. And then I'll set this guy to maybe have a colon followed by counter. We'll just build a string. Mike followed by 0, Mike 1, Mike 2, Mike 3, Mike 4, that kind of thing. Oh, I think we have to give this guy a default value. So if this variable was not found, this will boil down to a -1. But we know we did give it a variable named counter. Okay, so from main activity, every single time we hit our next button, we increment counter, which is a global variable. So counter started off at 0. So the first time through, it'll put 0 through. Then 0 became 1. It'll put a 1 through, a 2 through, a 3 through. So every single time we go back and relaunch that next screen, we're throwing a new version of that counter in there. This would be our proof that we didn't actually go back to the previous version of that screen. Instead, we launched a new version of that screen. So there's my screen 1, which has our screen 2, which is a 0. I go back to it. Now it's a 1. I go back to it. Now it's a 2. Now, if I go to home and then I go back here, it's still a 2. So when I went to home here, it paused it, right? It paused it, but it did not change it. It did not relaunch it when I came back. And if I want to see that in action, if I go to this screen 2, if I say on pause, it'll override that. And what I'll do here is, here, let me just get my text view again. Name TV.set text. We'll change it to Woot. All right, so now I've created my own local copy of OnPause. I've added another thing because by default, it just calls the parents OnPause, which doesn't do anything. The default behavior of OnPause is, okay, we're going in the background, thumbs up. Everything's fine. But now I'm saying, you know what? I want something to happen when I pause this. I want to just overwrite my mic 2, mic 3, mic 4, whatever, to just the word woot for no good reason other than I can. Okay. So we'll run this again. We'll go to screen 2. I'll hit back. Actually, did you see that? As I was going back, it paused. That shows us, do you see it flip to woot? Watch what's happening here. When I go to this, activity is running. When another activity goes into the foreground, what's happening? It calls on pause. Once it's no longer visible, it calls on stop. Once it's finished, but before being destroyed, it calls on destroy. So on pause, we saw it. We saw that occur, right? We go back and I'll show it to you again. So I'll go to screen 2. Now watch when I hit the back button. You'll see, watch up here. You'll see it switch to woot if you missed it the first time. See it? Happened on the screen. Now, let's just bump that one more little stop. So instead of on pause, let's move that logic into on stop. On stop is after the activity is no longer visible. All right, make sense? So I'll change this guy. We'll do our on stop. We'll just take that same logic. We'll just dump it out of there and put it into here. So we've kind of wasted our time with on pause here. All we're doing is calling our parents' version of it, but it's not hurting anything. So now I have this done inside of on stop. If you look at this thing here, on stop happens after the activity is no longer visible. So we won't see it flip to woot. It's still flip to woot. We just won't visually see it happen. So we'll go ahead and run this. Go to screen 2. I hit back. We didn't see it happen, right? Go to screen 2. I hit back. We didn't see it happen. But now, if I go here like this, I didn't close it. I didn't hit back. I didn't kill it. I just paused it because I have another thing that took over the screen. If we go back to this guy here, it says, another activity comes into the foreground, and the activity that just came into the foreground is kind of like our main operating system home screen activity. Then it's no longer visible, so on stop got called. Now, when the user returns to the activity, it goes back to on restart, and then the activity is running. So we could have an on restart thing here too. I'll show you that in a second. But we'll go back in here. So now I'll go ahead and notice here that the thing it thinks this activity is going to say still shows a 1 because that's the screenshot it took, right? As we were going into the background, it took a screenshot of our last version of that. But now when I launch it, shows you the current version of it, which has woot on it. All right. Now, I promise you that woot had actually previously changed, right? Because what we just saw is the screenshot updating to the real activity. But we saw the woot happen in the background. So if I go back now and then I go to screen 2, we're back to our counter now. See how this is working? Okay, so you have these different interjection points if you want them. Okay, so with all that in mind, let's get back to this idea of singletons versus PutExtras. When I go to screen 3, oh, right now I'm not passing it to screen 3 yet, so let's finish doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and on screen 2, I'm going to steal the code from our first guy. So I'll go ahead and put our name, Mike, into the second one. But actually what we're going to do, I'm just going to write it in here. For screen 2, when I go to my third screen, I'm going to say I dot PutExtra name is going to be I dot get string extra name. So I'm passing the buck, right? I'm just saying, look, I'm going to add to my new extras, my new intent. I'm going to add to that an extra name, and its value is going to be the value that used to be associated with name and the extra that was passed here. Which then means I should be able to do all of this in my screen 3. I'll omit the counter part. So we'll go ahead and this will get Mike to screen 3. And we did name that guy, name TV, did we not? Yep, name TV. So from screen 2, when we click a button, we add to our extras a variable name whose value is the same as the value of name that was passed to this activity. Then we start the new activity in screen 3. We go ahead and we get our intent. We extract the value of name, which we know is Mike because that's where I started it, right? Screen 1, put Mike in. Screen 2, passed Mike along from the intent. Screen 3 now is extracting it and putting it on the screen, setting that text to that. So go and run this. Go to screen 2. There's our Mike. Go to screen 3. Did I not set it on screen 3? Screen 3, get our text view, get the intent, get the string, set the text for that guy. Let me make sure I named it out here on screen 3. There's our text view. It's called name TV. Oh, that should work. What'd you do? What's it not happy with here? Oh, that's fine. So is it getting set to the empty string? Let me just prove something here real quick. I'm just going to set it to LOL real quick just to make sure that's getting passed along. Because I actually think I know what the issue is. I think once you get something from your intents, it deletes it from the intents, and that's why I can't get that value twice. So it should say LOL now. Yeah, so we have access to that. The problem is right here. When I say get extras name, that's not finding anything because I had previously gotten it. I had already extracted it. So if instead I do something like private string name, set name equal to it there, and then down here I just pass on name. Really, I can say this dot name. Then I'm only reading from the intents extras one time, because once you read from it, it does remove it. So now it'll pass Mike along. Screen 2, go to screen 3. There's Mike. All right. So we would say this is getting a little bit out of hand. I have the same value, the name equals Mike, that I'm passing between 3 different screens, right? And we proved you can do it, right? We said, okay, you know, we'll add it to the extras from screen, the first screen to the second screen, no problem. Oh, you need to get to the third screen? Okay, I'll add it to the extras to the third screen. We can just keep going, right? You got 15 screens in your application. You're constantly packing this thing into your bag, into your intent to make sure you get it to all the different screens. Now, if you remember, we talked about the Singleton design pattern. Okay, remember again, the design pattern is a proposed good solution to a quote common problem, or common can mean different things to different people depending on the industry you're in. But one of the things, what the Singleton design pattern says is that it's a good idea to store things in a centralized location, in a single place, hence the name Singleton, in a single place when it needs to be accessed by multiple, in our case here, multiple screens. All right, so kind of, and then we can decide what it means to be multiple screens in terms of at what point is it inconvenient, at what point is the data that we need to share inconvenient to send through extras, and we maybe want to look at an alternative approach. Probably when we just shared the thing from screen 0 to screen 1, wasn't the end of the world. We could use the extras, but now that we're doing it to 3 different screens, we're kind of feeling it's a little tedious, constantly packaging it up. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a singleton. And I think I mentioned last time that built into Android, at least it used to have this, there was a way to create a singleton directly. I was trying to show you where that was, even though I do not use it. That is interesting, though, that it's, I wonder if I say Java class. Well, I think I had looked at that last time. Yeah, it's not built in there anymore. Good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my own singleton, which is very simple. It sounds fancier than it actually is. So I'm going to right click here. I'm going to say I'm going to create a new Java class, plain Jane Java class. And I'm going to call this guy my singleton. All right. Now inside of my singleton, I'm going to put a bunch of variables, but I'm going to make them static fields. That means they're owned by the class. When something has static in front of it, I access it using the name of the class in which the variable was defined, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say static string name is equal to Mike. Like that. And then in screen 2, I don't have to get my intent. I don't have to extract a name. I don't have to do this. I can just say my Singleton .name. On screen 3, similarly, my Singleton .name. Back on our original screen, I no longer need to package up any extras. On my second screen, I no longer need to package up any extras. So now I've just created intents, launch screens. The piece of information that I want to share between my 3 screens, I've stored in a single place inside of a class called my Singleton that just has a static variable in it. There's nothing fancy schmancy about this class, right? I don't even have a constructor, right? This is just a little bucket to hold a bunch of static variables. And the variable I have in there right now is name. So now I can go run this guy, and you'll see that Mike gets to all 3 screens because I shared it. I stored it in one central place, this Singleton, and then made it available to all the other screens. There's my Mike. There's my Mike. And it came from that Singleton rather than me packaging up inside of extras. Same thing's true with our counter. So I can go into my Singleton here, and I can add a static int counter and maybe start that guy off at 0. And then inside of main activity, I can increment our counter. Again, I'm not putting it in extras. I'm just incrementing the counter, the number of times that thing updates. On screen 2, when I set the text up here, I'll go ahead and concatenate onto that. The current value of counter. And I can do the same thing on the 3rd screen if I want now. Since I've conveniently made these things flow through. So I can keep track of my counters now on all those screens. Because no longer is counter a local variable inside of main activity. It's now a global variable inside my Singleton that's accessible anywhere inside of my application. Run this again. There's my original counter. Oh, went back too far. Screen 2, go back. There's my counters incrementing. If I go to screen 3, my counters incrementing. Now remember that we paused the previous activity when the new one launched. And what did we say to do when screen 2 is paused? Screen 2, well, actually we did it on stop. We set the text view to woot after it was off the screen. So when I come back to screen 2, it's now back to woot. When I go back here, and then go back to screen 2, I have my updated counter. So on and so forth. That makes some sense? All right, so hopefully we're recognizing that, you know what, this was a pretty convenient way of sending information between multiple screens. Significantly easier than adding extras to our intent, extracting extras from our intent on the other side. That became a little bit tedious, right? And that's actually the problem with singletons, especially in Java, but really any language, because we can create singletons pretty similar to this in almost any language. This is so convenient and so quick to do that we can get lulled into doing this for everything, right? We can decide, oh, I'm just gonna, any variable that I need, even on only one other screen, I'm just gonna go ahead and throw into a singleton. But then what we end up having is we end up having a situation where our singleton ends up having just being this gigantic thing. There's a zillion values in it, even variables that are relatively throwaway that only belong to like one other screen, but you've put them in this one centralized location to just make life convenient. And now all of a sudden your code is difficult to maintain because of that. That makes some sense? Okay, so what we really want to do is we want to go through some sort of litmus test. When do we use a singleton? We might say if we only need to share data between two screens, using PutExtras makes more sense. So we don't end up having a bunch of extra stuff in our singleton. If we need to share data between, let's say, more than two screens, we have likely crossed the line and should use a, well, let's say cross the PutExtras line and should use a singleton for sharing that data. Actually, why don't we go ahead and say more than three screens there. If we are on the fence and need to share data with three screens, it is up to us as the programmer. We should make the decision based on maintaining the program moving forward and not letting our singleton get too bloated. Right? Realistically speaking, we probably could make the argument that whenever you need to share stuff between more than two screens, you can use a singleton, because nothing keeps us from having more than one singleton. Right? We can have a singleton maybe that has a whole bunch of math formulas in it. We can have another singleton that maybe has the names of Hearthstone cards or something like that in it, or a collection of our Hearthstone cards that we want to share between multiple screens, something like that. So with all of that in mind, you know, the only real decision-making thing is when we have exactly three screens that need to share something. And the reality is that you probably could just use a singleton for anything more than two screens and almost always be correct. But definitely try to name your variable something meaningful and use multiple singletons when you are sharing information between, you know, if you have an app that has 15 or 20 screens in it and you're sharing information between all those screens, only some of those screens are actually sharing information. So you could make an argument to create a singleton for each relationship between screens so that you can conveniently get data over there, but not necessarily have one gigantic singleton with everything under the sun in it. All right, so questions about the use of singletons. All right. So for our homework, create a 3-screen application that asks the user for a number on, well, let's see, ask the user for a, yeah, we'll say number on screen 1. Screen 2 should show the factorial of that number. Screen 3 should show the factorial of the number from screen 2. So as an example, if you entered a 4 on screen 1, screen 2 should show 4 factorial is 4 times 3, which is 12, times 2, which is 24. Screen 3 should show big number. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Yeah, in that example. It's possible you might get the output being that thing that says, you know, e to the 23rd or something. That's fine. But you're proving that you can move data between 3 different screens and perform some operations on that data. Make sense what I'm asking you to do? So pretty similar thing to what we wrote here. And I'll go ahead and, I don't remember, do I already, so I'm going to import this into version control. Share project on GitHub. So this is up on GitHub now. Using the example from class, that guy, create our 3-screen application, yada, yada, yada. You know what? Let me change this a little bit. Just so you don't have to screw around with some giant number. Should show the factorial of that number. Screen 3 should show the, let's call this, let's change this to the square root of the number from screen 2. .89. So something like this. And I'll put a note here. The math class in Java might be helpful for calculating square root. I think we've used it before from one of our other little examples, but you might go back and review it. Make sure that you know how to read the documentation and look in the math class. You see that the square root function is a static function. How do you call static functions? Using the name of the class in which the function was defined. Okay, this will make it a little bit cleaner. So you don't have some gigantic number, because we see factorial gets out of hand pretty quickly. So this will be, have you change the math up a little bit. All right, questions, comments, concerns, bribes. All right, I will see everybody on Friday.